It was a warm July evening in 1994 when the sleepy town of Maysville, nestled in the rolling plains of Indiana, came alive with the lights, sounds, and smells of the annual county fair. Families spilled across the grounds, children clutched cotton candy, and the hum of carnival rides echoed through the night. For 17-year-old Crystal Braddock, it was supposed to be the highlight of her summer, her last fair before senior year. Crystal wasn't the kind of girl who faded into the background. With sun-bleached hair and a laugh that could disarm anyone, she had a light about her that friends described as magnetic. She loved sketching, country music, and was saving up tips from the local diner to buy her first car. That night, she was seen near the Ferris wheel around 9:15 p.m., talking with friends, taking Polaroids, and, as a few witnesses would later claim, watching the tilt-a-whirl with a strange expression, as if something had caught her eye, or someone. Then, just like that, she was gone. Her friends thought she'd gone to get a soda or meet someone. Her mother, Diane, waited by the exit gate, pacing nervously as the clock crept past 10, then 11. But no one ever saw Crystal leave the fairgrounds. No security camera caught her. No car was heard peeling away. It was as if the fair had swallowed her whole. For weeks, the small-town community was gripped by shock and disbelief. Helicopters scanned the cornfields, divers searched nearby lakes, and psychic hotlines buzzed with tips. But all they ever found was a single clue. A scrap of torn red fabric near the tilt-a-whirl ride, similar to the shirt Crystal had been wearing. Time moved on, but the pain didn't. Diane kept Crystal's room just the way it had been. On her dresser sat a worn friendship bracelet made of pink and white thread, tied tightly. One Crystal had promised never to take off. She used to say it held all her summer memories. And then, nearly 3 decades later in 2022, something happened. A traveling carnival ride, the very tilt-a-whirl Crystal had been seen near that night, broke down during a routine fair in Ohio. When the ride repair team disassembled part of its base, they found something wedged inside a rusted compartment, a pink and white friendship bracelet. Next to it, tangled in dust and time, was a torn page from what appeared to be a journal, with just a few words scrawled in panicked handwriting. He said no one would find me here. Tonight, we take you back to that fairground, to the unanswered questions, to the pain of a mother who never stopped believing her daughter was out there somewhere, and to the stunning discovery that would blow open a cold case nearly forgotten. What really happened to Crystal Braddock on that July night? And why did it take 28 years and a broken ride to find the first real clue? Let's go back to the beginning. The Maysville County Fair of 1994 was one of the most anticipated events of the summer. School was out, the air was thick with the scent of funnel cakes and popcorn, and laughter echoed through the warm Indiana night. That year, the fair had drawn record crowds, more than 3,000 attendees over the weekend, and the atmosphere pulsed with energy. For Crystal Braddock, that Saturday night felt electric. She'd been waiting all week for it. She had plans to meet up with her best friends, Lindsay Phelps, Rachel Suarez, and Amy Coates. The four had been inseparable since middle school, known affectionately in town as the Sunset Girls, a name they earned for always riding their bikes out past the fields to watch the sun dip below the corn stalks every summer evening. That afternoon, Crystal had gotten ready with Lindsay at her house. She wore a red plaid shirt, tied at the waist, and high-waisted denim shorts. Around her wrist was that woven bracelet, the one she'd made with Amy 2 summers earlier. "Don't lose it," Amy had joked. "If you do, you lose your memories." Crystal had just smiled. "Then I'll wear it forever." By 7:15 p.m., the girls were at the fairgrounds. They rode the scrambler 3 times in a row, daring each other to raise their hands during the fastest spin. At 8:40, Crystal ducked into the fortune-teller's tent and emerged laughing, holding a fake crystal ball with her name engraved on it. Lindsay remembers teasing her. Was she right? Gonna fall in love tonight? Crystal just grinned and rolled her eyes. But sometime around 9:10, something changed. The group had moved toward the Tilt-A-Whirl, a rickety, brightly lit beast of a ride that always had the longest line. Lindsay recalls that Crystal became unusually quiet, gazing at the ride, almost distracted. She just kind of zoned out, Lindsay would later tell investigators. Like she saw something, or someone. I asked her if she was okay, and she said, "Yeah, just gonna check something." That was it. That was the last time Lindsay, or anyone, would see Crystal Braddock. The time was 9:15 p.m. At 9:30, Rachel noticed Crystal still hadn't come back. The girls waited near the fried dough stand, checking the nearby food stalls and restrooms. At first, they weren't worried. Maybe she met a boy, Amy had said, laughing nervously. Or maybe she ran into someone from school. By 10:10 p.m., concern started to grow. They walked the entire length of the fairgrounds twice. Lindsay began calling out her name. No answer. At 10:45, Diane Braddock stood at the main gate, scanning each person exiting the fair. She'd promised to pick up Crystal at 11, but her mother's instinct told her something was wrong. She was never late, Diane told a local reporter later. And if she was, she called. She always called. When Crystal still hadn't shown up by 11:15, Diane flagged down a security guard. "My daughter's missing," she said breathlessly. She was wearing a red shirt. Her name's Crystal. By midnight, the Maysville police were on site, talking to vendors and scanning the fairgrounds. The rides were powering down, the music stopped, and the familiar festive lights took on a more sinister hue. The fairgrounds were locked down and searched until 3 a.m. They found nothing. The next day, the news spread like wildfire. "Local teen missing from county fair," screamed the Sunday edition of the Maysville Gazette. Volunteers flooded in. Crystal's picture, a school portrait with a denim jacket and her easy smile, was plastered on every telephone pole in town. Search dogs were brought in. The state police combed the fairgrounds, surrounding woods, and adjacent cornfields for 3 straight days. A team of divers searched Willow Creek, the nearest body of water. Helicopters circled overhead. The FBI was even called in by the 3rd day. At 2:10 p.m. on Tuesday, a deputy found a piece of torn red fabric, stained and dirty, in the grass about 20 feet behind the Tilt-A-Whirl. It matched Crystal's shirt, but there was no blood, no footprints, no other trace. "I remember sitting there in the living room," Diane said in a 2001 interview, holding her pillow, praying, just praying she'd walk through that door. And every time the phone rang, I wanted it to be her. But it never was. As the week dragged on, more details came to light, but they only deepened the mystery. A vendor named Earl Watkins, who worked the ring toss booth, told police he saw a man talking to Crystal around 9:15 near the ride. He was tall, maybe 6 foot, wearing a dark green jacket even though it was warm. Kind of looked like he didn't belong, Earl had said. She didn't look scared, but she didn't look happy either. Police sketched out a composite from his description, a generic face with a narrow jaw and unkempt hair. Flyers were distributed statewide. Over the next few weeks, dozens of tips poured in. Someone claimed to have seen Crystal hitchhiking 2 towns over. Another person said they saw her at a truck stop in Illinois. A psychic from Ohio claimed she was being held underground in a bunker. None of it led anywhere, and despite exhaustive efforts, the case went cold. Crystal's room remained untouched. Her posters, her sketchbooks, the cassette player with Garth Brooks inside, all frozen in time. Diane refused to box anything up. "She's not gone," she insisted to anyone who asked. "She's just delayed." Detective Alan Reeves, the lead investigator on the case, kept Crystal's file on his desk for years. "It haunted me," he once said. "There was just nothing, like a magic trick. One moment she's there, the next, poof, gone." People began to whisper theories. Had she run away? Been lured? Was someone hiding something? Some believed she'd been abducted by someone working the fair. Others thought she'd left willingly and changed her identity. But without a body, a note, or a trace, the truth remained elusive. 28 years passed, and the question that echoed louder with every passing year was this: how can someone disappear in a crowd of thousands and leave no trace? Weeks turned into months, and months into years. Maysville moved on, but Diane Braddock didn't. Every Saturday, like clockwork, she would drive out to the county fairgrounds. Even when there was no fair, no crowds, no lights, just a wide, silent patch of land, she would sit in her car and watch the tilt-a-whirl, still bolted in place year-round, and ask the question that would define the rest of her life. What happened to my daughter? She wasn't alone. Crystal's best friends never forgot either. Lindsay moved out of state after high school but kept a shoebox full of photos and notes from Crystal. Amy struggled with guilt, always wondering if she should have followed Crystal that night. "I dream about her," she later confessed. "In the dream, we're always just about to ride the tilt-a-whirl, and then she vanishes again." One of the most heart-wrenching moments came in the spring of 1996. Nearly 2 years after the disappearance, Diane received an anonymous letter in the mail. No return address, just a sheet of notebook paper. It read, "She's not far." She was scared. He took her behind the ride. "You were right to worry." The handwriting was jagged, almost childish. Police tried to trace it. The envelope had no fingerprints, no unique postmark. Nothing. Some believed it was a cruel hoax, but Diane swore the phrase, "You were right to worry," mirrored something Crystal once said to her when leaving the house late one night. That letter became Diane's obsession. She paid for independent handwriting experts, tracked down every fair worker from 1994, and even tried hypnosis. None of it led to a breakthrough. By 2000, the official investigation was declared inactive, not closed, but cold. Yet some wouldn't let it die. Online forums began popping up in the early 2000s where amateur sleuths discussed Crystal's case. One particularly active thread, titled "The Fairground Phantom," compiled maps of the fairgrounds, timelines of witness statements, even a digital recreation of the tilt-a-whirl's layout. Reddit users in the 2010 would later revive interest in the case, citing eerie similarities to other fairground disappearances across the Midwest in the 80s and 90s. A retired detective from Ohio even contacted the Maysville police in 2011, convinced that Crystal's disappearance was connected to a 1992 unsolved case involving a missing teenager named Jenny Polk in Chillicothe. Jenny had also vanished during a state fair, and in both cases, a ride technician had gone missing shortly afterward. That man was never found. Still, no hard evidence, no solid leads, just shadows and speculation. In 2016, on the 22nd anniversary of Crystal's disappearance, something eerie happened. The old tilt-a-whirl, still operated by the traveling Jensen Brothers Carnival, was scheduled to appear again at the Maysville Fair. Diane, now 60, protested the decision. She stood outside the fairground gates, holding a faded poster of Crystal's face, her voice trembling with age, but still unbroken. "You don't get to laugh and ride and scream on the thing that swallowed my daughter," she told a local reporter. Fair organizers tried to diffuse tensions, claiming there was no proof the ride had any connection, but the symbolism couldn't be ignored. That weekend, a group of teens filmed a ghost hunt TikTok inside the fairgrounds after hours, and one of them claimed to capture a voice saying, "Behind the ride." The video went viral. Commenters dissected every frame. The ride operator's past was investigated. Nothing concrete ever came of it, but the internet was once again buzzing with Crystal's name. So, what happened that night in July of 1994? Let's revisit the last confirmed sightings. 9:05 p.m. Crystal and her friends are seen near the Scrambler. 9:10 p.m. Crystal walks toward the Tilt-A-Whirl. 9:15 p.m. Witnesses report seeing Crystal speaking to an unknown man. 9:20 p.m. Friends notice she hasn't returned. 10 p.m. Initial search begins. Here's what we know. No cameras caught her leaving. No one saw her in the parking lot. Her bracelet, the one she swore she'd never take off, was not found on her wrist, or anywhere. That, more than anything, chilled Diane. If she had run away, she would have kept it. She loved that bracelet more than anything. Ride operators were interviewed. One, Paul Jensen, co-owner of the Carnival company, stated under oath that he never saw her near the ride and didn't recall any strange behavior that night. His record was clean. Background checks revealed no red flags, but in a later interview in 2004, a former employee of Jensen Brothers claimed Paul used to disappear for hours during fair events. He always had a key to the Tilt-A-Whirl's base panel, the employee said. Said it was for emergency maintenance, the same panel where, decades later, something would finally be found. The psychological toll on Diane was immense. By 2008, she'd lost her job, sold the family home, and was living in a small apartment on the edge of town. But she never stopped searching. She created a website, findcrystal.org, filled with photos, timelines, and open letters to her daughter. One heartbreaking entry from 2013 reads, "I saw someone today with your same walk. For a moment I forgot to breathe. But it wasn't you. It never is." She funded yearly billboard ads with Crystal's face, hired a private investigator when she could afford it, appeared on a short-lived true crime podcast in 2019, and each July she still returned to the fairgrounds. For Diane, time had frozen. For everyone else, it marched on. Crystal's friends scattered to the winds. Lindsay got married, had children, and rarely talked about that summer. Amy struggled with depression and checked into a treatment center in her late 20s. "There's something about losing someone when you're that young," she said in a rare interview. "It stunts you emotionally. Part of me is still 17, standing in that hot fairground, waiting for her to come back." Even Detective Alan Reeves, now long retired, couldn't shake the case. He kept the original red fabric in his desk drawer. "It was the only real thing we had," he said in a 2018 reunion with Diane. "And it told us nothing. Until it did. It would take a ride malfunction, a random crew, and a storm that forced the Tilt-A-Whirl into disassembly for the first time in 20 years. That discovery would change everything. But we're not there yet. We're still in the dark, waiting with Diane, waiting with Amy, waiting with Crystal's memory, frozen in time, hoping for a noise in the silence, hoping for one more piece of the puzzle." The disappearance of Crystal Braddock haunted Maysville long after the news vans left, after the posters faded, after the Tilt-A-Whirl was packed up and moved to another town. But for those closest to Crystal, especially her mother, her friends, and the investigators who never stopped turning over stones, the silence didn't bring peace. It brought something more corrosive: obsession. From 1994 through the early 2000s, the Crystal Braddock case grew into a quiet legend in southern Indiana. Parents would whisper warnings to their children at fairgrounds. "Stay close. Don't go off alone. Remember what happened to that girl." Each year, reporters from the local paper wrote an anniversary piece. The photos always showed Diane Braddock in front of the old Tilt-A-Whirl, staring off into the distance, waiting. But behind the scenes, several people had begun piecing together their own theories. each one more unsettling than the last. One of the first serious leads came in 1997 when a woman named Darlene Vickers came forward. She had worked at the Maysville Fair the year Crystal disappeared, running a cotton candy booth near the back of the grounds. At the time, she hadn't thought much of it. But years later, while cleaning out old belongings, she stumbled across a photograph she'd taken that night. A blurry shot of the Carnival rides lit up under the night sky. In the corner of the photo was Crystal, unmistakably, wearing her red shirt, and next to her, partially obscured by shadows, stood a man, tall, in a dark jacket, the same general description given by multiple witnesses back in 1994. The image caused a ripple in the local community. It was published in the Gazette. Police enhanced it, tried facial recognition, and sent it to the FBI. But the results were inconclusive. The man's face was just too blurred. No match. Still, it reignited interest in the case. And it prompted one chilling revelation. A retired officer from the Muncie Police Department saw the photo and called the Maysville station. He said the man resembled a drifter named Jack Elwood, who had been questioned in 1995 in connection with a missing girl in Illinois, but was never charged. Elwood had a criminal record for minor assaults, had worked at carnivals throughout the Midwest, and had vanished off the grid in 1998. Could he have been at the Maysville Fair? Could he have worked that ride? Police couldn't confirm it. Jensen Brothers Carnival claimed they had no record of Elwood, but privately, Detective Reeves always believed there was a link. "He was the shadow that kept me up at night," Reeves said in a later interview, "but we never got close enough to grab him." Meanwhile, Diane Braddock was developing her own theory. She didn't believe Crystal was taken by a stranger. She believed her daughter had been targeted, that someone local knew something, and that they were protected by silence or fear. In 2003, Diane hired her first private investigator, James "Jim" Felder, a retired police sergeant with a reputation for solving cold cases. Felder spent the better part of 2 years interviewing every known carnival worker from the 1994 fair. Most were dead ends, but one name kept coming up: Tyler Knox. Knox was a ride technician who had worked with Jensen Brothers until the fall of 1994. He was known for being quiet, kept to himself, and was described as nervous, always watching people. He'd left abruptly, citing family issues. When Felder tracked him down in Kansas, Knox was living under a different name. In a tense conversation, Knox refused to answer most questions, but did say one cryptic thing: "I didn't see nothing. But that ride, it was wrong. Should have never kept using it." The statement was vague, possibly meaningless, but it stuck with Felder. He requested access to maintenance records for the Tilt-A-Whirl from 1994. Jensen Brothers refused. Without a court order, there was nothing more he could do. The investigation hit another wall. Over the next decade, there would be other leads and false hopes. In 2007, a woman in Nashville came forward claiming to be Crystal Braddock. She said she had escaped a cult and didn't remember her past until recently. Diane flew to meet her, but DNA proved she wasn't a match. Diane returned home devastated. In 2010, a backpack was found near a dried-up reservoir 40 miles from Maysville. Inside were teenage girls' belongings: a brush, some jewelry, a weathered notebook, but none of the items belonged to Crystal. Again, another dead end. Then came the online era. With the rise of social media, Crystal's case found new life. In 2014, a Reddit user going by the name Fairwatcher94 posted a detailed timeline of the case in the Unresolved Mysteries subreddit. The post went viral. Within a week, over 1,000 comments poured in, some from people who claimed to have attended the fair in 1994, others who claimed they saw suspicious men near the Tilt-A-Whirl that night. One user uploaded a grainy home video from that summer. In the background, barely visible, was a red blur near the base of the ride. It was impossible to confirm anything, but the detail that chilled viewers most? At minute 127 of the video, a voice off camera says, "She doesn't look okay." Commenters dissected it endlessly. Was it Crystal? Who said it? Was it just coincidence? Amateur investigators began creating maps, timelines, and recreations. Someone even built a 3D model of the fairgrounds using archival photos and drone footage. Yet despite the enthusiasm, no new evidence emerged. What it did reveal, however, was a growing frustration with the original investigation. Many online sleuths believed key leads had been ignored or buried. Some suspected the Jensen brothers themselves. Others believed it was a police cover-up. Diane didn't care for the conspiracy theories, but she welcomed the attention. "If they're talking about her," she told a documentary crew in 2016, "they haven't forgotten her." By the 25th anniversary in 2019, the case was officially reclassified as an active cold case by the Indiana State Police. A new task force was formed using forensic genealogy and data mining techniques. They reanalyzed the original scrap of red fabric using advanced DNA methods. No new matches, but the pressure was growing. Local podcasts began covering the story. True crime bloggers flew into Maysville to interview Diane. A Change.org petition urged the state to reopen the full investigation. In the midst of it all, something unexpected happened. Paul Jensen, the Carnival owner, died of a heart attack in late 2020. His will contained no revelations, but in a curious twist, his estate included a sealed storage container auctioned off by his widow. Inside were rusted parts, papers, and a stack of ride maintenance logs, including some from 1994. One entry, dated July 17th, the morning after Crystal disappeared, caught the eye of a retired detective who had been scanning the files. Resecured loose panel under TOW3, bolt missing. Replaced, no visible damage. That location, TAW3, referred to the third car on the tilt-a-whirl. It had never been mentioned in previous records. It was the first concrete clue that something had been disturbed under the very ride where Crystal was last seen. That single note would become the catalyst for everything that came next. By early 2022, Jensen Brothers had sold the Tilt-A-Whirl to a smaller carnival chain in Ohio. The ride had seen better days. Frequent breakdowns, mechanical issues. In July, during a routine inspection before a county fair event, the maintenance team was ordered to fully disassemble the base due to a suspected structural weakness. That's when they found it. Behind a rusted panel, sealed with old bolts and barely visible from the outside, was a narrow compartment packed with insulation, old cloth rags, and something more. A pink and white friendship bracelet, fused into a clump of debris, aged by time. Beside it, a torn page from what appeared to be a journal. The words, in barely legible smeared ink. "He said no one would find me here. Please tell my mom I didn't want to go." It was the breakthrough no one expected. After 28 years, the ride had finally spoken. When the ride repair crew uncovered that hidden compartment in the Tilt-A-Whirl in 2022, time seemed to bend. The pink and white bracelet, still intact, was unmistakably Crystal's. Dozens of photos existed of her wearing it, a personal artifact far more telling than any circumstantial theory. But the journal page, that was something else entirely. It was a whisper from the past, soaked in despair. "He said no one would find me here. Please tell my mom I didn't want to go." The words tore through Diane Braddock like a blade. For nearly 3 decades, she had lived with the possibility, hope, really, that her daughter was alive somewhere, maybe even watching from afar. But now, the truth was slinking in. Someone had taken Crystal. Someone had hidden her. And someone maybe more than one person, had made sure that no one would ever look there. Within 24 hours of the discovery, the tilt-a-whirl was quarantined at a secure location in Columbus, Ohio. Crime scene investigators combed every inch. Swabs were taken, trace DNA collected, every bolt and beam documented. FBI agents confirmed the bracelet's authenticity within the week, using old DNA samples from Crystal's hairbrush preserved by her mother in a private storage box. It matched. There was no doubt. The journal page was more complicated. No full notebook was recovered, just that single torn sheet. Analysts found partial fingerprints, but they were smudged and incomplete. Still, the ink was consistent with pens manufactured in the early 1990s. Forensics experts determined the paper had likely been folded for years, possibly decades, inside the hidden compartment. How did it get there? And who put it there? Detective Marla Hicks, now leading the reopened task force, described it best in a press conference. "This is the kind of break investigators pray for, and we're going to chase it to the end." The new investigation focused immediately on Jensen Brothers, Carnival's staff records, but the problem was there weren't many. Their HR practices were loose. Many hires were seasonal, paid in cash, and poorly documented. Records from 1994 had been largely lost or destroyed over time. Still, several key names emerged again: Paul Jensen, Tyler Knox, and an elusive third man, Roy McKellen. Roy had been briefly mentioned in early case notes, but never fully pursued. He had worked maintenance for a few fairs in Indiana and Michigan, then disappeared from the paper trail. When investigators ran his name through a federal database, they were stunned. Roy McKellen had died in 1998. In prison, on unrelated charges. He'd been convicted of sexual assault in Iowa, a case involving a teenage girl. The pattern was disturbing, and according to prison records, just before his death from a heart condition, McKellen confessed to hurting another girl at a fair years back, one they never found. His cellmate reported it, but the note was never forwarded to Indiana authorities. Until now. Meanwhile, Diane Braddock was experiencing a storm of emotions. For years, she had fought to keep Crystal's name alive. And now, finally, the world was listening again. Her face appeared on national news. The bracelet discovery was trending on social media. True crime. YouTubers flocked to Maysville, speculating about McKellen, Jensen, and others. But for Diane, it wasn't about theories. It was about pain. Sharp, unbearable pain. "I wanted the truth," she told a journalist, "but I never imagined it would come like this. I thought maybe she'd knock on my door. I didn't think I'd get a bracelet from a hole in a ride." She kept the item, now cleaned and sealed in glass, on her mantelpiece. Beside it, a candle. She lit it every night. Detectives expanded the scope of the case beyond Indiana. They began re-examining other Carnival-related disappearances from the late 80s and 90s. One stood out: Jenny Polk, the girl from Ohio who disappeared from the Chillicothe Fair in 1992. Like Crystal, she was last seen near a tilt-a-whirl, and like Crystal, there had been whispers of a quiet man in a green jacket. Both rides had been managed by Jensen Brothers. In light of the 2022 evidence, Jenny's case was reopened. Soon, a new theory emerged: the possibility of a serial predator using the mobility of traveling carnivals to stalk, isolate, and abduct. The idea was terrifying. It explained the randomness, the clean disappearances, the absence of physical evidence. But it raised another question. If Crystal's bracelet had been hidden under the ride, what else could be buried in similar places? A multi-state task force was formed. Using maintenance blueprints, they identified all tilt-a-whirl rides that had ever been in Jensen Brothers' inventory. There were 5 models that had been cycled through different towns between 1989 and 2002. 3 were decommissioned. One had been sold internationally, but the fifth, the one where Crystal's bracelet was found, had been in nearly 60 counties over 3 decades. Investigators issued public pleas. They encouraged county fair organizers to report any items ever recovered from those rides, no matter how small or seemingly irrelevant. That's when a fair manager from rural Kentucky came forward. Back in 1995, during routine ride maintenance, a technician had found a charm, a gold pendant shaped like a sun. It was turned into the fair office's lost and found box. No one ever claimed it. Diane confirmed it had belonged to Crystal. She remembered her daughter buying it from a street vendor a month before she vanished. Another artifact, another piece of the trail. The investigation was evolving, but so was the story online. The subreddit Fairground Phantom exploded with over 50,000 members. Users uncovered more archival footage, police scanner audio, and scanned newspaper clippings from other cases. A true crime podcast called Vanished in the Lights ran a 4-part series that became Apple's #1 podcast that fall. One retired ride operator posted anonymously on a message board saying, "We always joked about TAW3 being cursed. Stuff would break for no reason. But I remember one guy, Roy, always working under it at night. Said he was tightening the sole. Never sat right with me. Was it just cryptic Carnival lore, or a window into something much darker?" Detective Hicks didn't dismiss anything. "We're treating every story, every clue, as if it might be the key, because now we know we missed something before." In late 2022, a forensic excavation of the Tilt-A-Whirl base was conducted. This time, they went deeper. Beneath the metal compartment where the bracelet had been found, cadaver dogs alerted on the soil. Tests revealed trace organic material, deteriorated over time, but suggesting decomposition had once occurred there. Investigators now had probable cause to believe Crystal may have been killed, or at least injured, beneath the ride itself. But without a body, they couldn't confirm it. No bones, no teeth, no full remains. Still, the evidence was undeniable. Crystal hadn't just disappeared from the fair. She had died there. Diane struggled to accept it. For years, her mind had rejected the idea of death, but the mounting proof left little room for hope. "People talk about closure," she said in a 2023 interview, "but it doesn't feel like closing a door. It feels like standing in front of a wall. There's nowhere left to go." A memorial was held in Maysville in July 2023, 29 years to the day since Crystal vanished. Hundreds gathered, former classmates, neighbors, even strangers who had followed her story online. The Tilt-A-Whirl, now dismantled for good, was replaced by a quiet flower garden with a plaque. "In memory of Crystal Braddock, 1977 to 1994, May, her light never dim, but there was still one chapter left. One final truth, buried for too long, that was about to come to light. The discovery of Crystal's bracelet and torn journal page had cracked the case wide open. But what it hadn't done, not yet, was answer the most critical question. Who? Who took her? Who spoke those last words, "He said no one would find me here"? Who knew the Tilt-A-Whirl was more than just a ride, but a tomb? That question loomed heavy over investigators. DNA analysis was slow, incomplete. No viable samples, and the suspects, Jensen, Knox, McKellen, were all either dead, missing, or impossible to link with physical evidence. Then, in October 2023, the phone rang at the Indiana State Police Department. It was a man named Charles "Charlie" Vexler. He had once been a junior technician for Jensen Brothers in the summer of 1994, just 19 at the time, working his first and only season on the road. He now lived in Boise, Idaho, worked in construction, and had been following the case online. He had never spoken to police, but the bracelet discovery broke something loose in him. "I have to talk," he said. "I've carried this for too long." Charlie flew to Indiana and sat down with Detective Hicks. What he told her changed the entire course of the investigation. He remembered the night Crystal disappeared. Not just vaguely, in detail. He remembered because he had been assigned to do late-night cleanup near the tilt-a-whirl, wiping down the base and securing the panels. Around 9:30 p.m., he said, he noticed something strange. The panel beneath car 3, TAW3, was already open. Normally it was bolted shut and only opened by lead technicians, but that night it hung slightly ajar. Inside, tools were scattered. Rags. A blanket. Then he saw something that made his blood run cold. A girl's shoe. Small, white, stained with something. Charlie turned and saw Roy McKellen walking toward him, holding a metal bolt in one hand and a flashlight in the other. "He didn't say anything," Charlie told Hicks. "He just looked at me, like a dare. I asked him what was going on, and he said, 'Mind your job, you didn't see anything.'" Charlie, young and afraid, backed off. He said nothing, finished his duties, tried to forget. He left the carnival just weeks later. He'd always wondered if what he saw had been what he feared, but convinced himself it wasn't real. Until now. Now he knew. Charlie's testimony, while still technically hearsay, gave police exactly what they needed. A timeline, a person of interest, a motive to revisit old leads. Investigators tracked down McKellen's former cellmate, a man named Terry Holmes, who had served a 12-year sentence for drug charges. Holmes agreed to speak on record. According to him, in the last weeks of McKellen's life, the man began having night terrors. He mumbled in his sleep, sometimes shouted, and on more than one occasion he said something chilling. "The fairground girl. She's still there. She's still right under their feet." Holmes admitted he never took it seriously. Thought it was just prison guilt rambling. But when the bracelet made headlines, everything changed. That's when he knew. McKellen had been confessing in his own broken way. The investigators now had two independent witnesses placing McKellen at the scene, one at the time of Crystal's disappearance and another during his final days. Still, questions remained. How had he hidden the bracelet? Why leave a journal page? Was it Crystal who tucked it away? Or McKellen mocking her? Investigators believe Crystal had been writing in her journal that night, something her friends confirmed she often carried in her purse. At some point, after being lured or forced beneath the ride, she managed to tear out a page. Maybe she hoped someone would find it. Maybe it was all she had time to do. That one small act may have been the only resistance she was able to offer. For Diane, hearing Charlie Wexler's confession was both devastating and strangely healing. She finally had a name, a moment, a place. It wasn't justice, but it was truth. At a press conference in November 2023, Diane stood beside Detective Hicks and read a short statement. Her voice cracked, but her words were clear. "To everyone who searched, who remembered her name, who refused to let her disappear, thank you. I spent half my life hoping she was out there. I now believe she was trying to get home. She tried to leave us a sign. And finally, we heard her." The tilt-a-whirl, the literal mechanism of Crystal's silence, was ordered destroyed by the Indiana State Police. In December 2023, it was dismantled piece by piece and melted down. Some protested the decision, citing historical value or forensic preservation. But to Diane and to Maysville, it was catharsis. The ride that had swallowed Crystal would never hurt another girl again. But there was one more twist. As state police sifted through McKellen's archived belongings, they found a box, unmarked, dusty, unremarkable at first glance. Inside was a small notebook. Most of the pages were blank, but one bore a single line scribbled in frantic handwriting. She said, "Tell my mom I didn't want to go." He had kept it, a trophy, a haunting memory, but he hadn't destroyed it. Maybe, in the end, even monsters want to be remembered, or forgiven. The Crystal Braddock case, one of Indiana's longest-running unsolved mysteries, was formally declared closed on January 18, 2024. Cause of death: undetermined. Presumed homicide. Perpetrator: Roy Allen McKellen, deceased. Diane Braddock never got to hold her daughter again, but she got what so many families of the missing never do: an answer. Even after the announcement that the Crystal Braddock case had been officially closed, the ripples of the revelation continued to move outward, through her family, her friends, the investigators, and the entire community of Maysville. Closure. The word sounded neat, clinical. But for Diane Braddock, closure didn't come with a file being stamped or a press conference broadcast on local news. It came in small, painful fragments, a quiet realization during breakfast that her daughter had never run away, a photo on her refrigerator that would never be updated, a bracelet once alive with teenage laughter, now caged behind museum glass. In her apartment, Diane had kept every letter, every news clipping, every drawing Crystal had ever made. After the case was closed, she laid them all out on her kitchen table, one by one, like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle. "This was her," she whispered. "This was all of her." And then, carefully, she tucked them into a box, not because she was forgetting, but because she no longer had to fight. The town of Maysville, too, changed after the case broke. The local fairgrounds, once a place of joy and family tradition, became a site of pilgrimage for many. Flowers began appearing in front of the newly installed memorial garden where the Tilt-A-Whirl once stood. Teenagers left friendship bracelets, handmade from pink and white string. Children placed notes in plastic sleeves that read things like, "You're safe now," and "I remember your name." Crystal had become more than a missing person. She had become a symbol, not of tragedy, but of endurance. She had waited to be found. And in the end, she had told her story the only way she could. Meanwhile, Detective Marla Hicks continued the investigation beyond Crystal's case. The forensic pattern of how McKellen had used the ride, hiding compartments, night shifts, carefully staged maintenance work, opened the door to broader inquiries. Indiana State Police quietly began cross-referencing other cold cases, especially ones involving carnivals, traveling amusement rides, and state fairs during the late 1980s and early 1990s. A new task force was formed under Hicks's leadership, Project Turnkey. Their goal, to identify potential additional victims of Roy McKellen, or others like him. Already they had reason to believe Crystal was not his first, and she might not have been his last. Crystal's friends were interviewed again, some for the first time in decades. Amy Coates, now in her 40s and a teacher in Minnesota, finally sat down for an emotional interview. "I remember that night so clearly," she said, her voice shaking. "We were all just kids, and it took me years to realize that something like this doesn't just take a life. It steals time. We were supposed to graduate together, travel, laugh about prom, but instead, we became a headline." Lindsay Phelps, who had moved to Arizona and rarely spoke of Crystal, sent a single letter to Diane after the closure. It read, "I used to dream she came back. I used to feel guilty for letting her walk off. But now I understand. She wasn't lost. She was hidden. And now she's home." In February 2024, Diane launched the Crystal Light Foundation, a non-profit focused on helping families of missing persons keep their cases visible. With donations pouring in from supporters around the world, the foundation launched a mobile app to help track traveling amusement workers and share cold case data across jurisdictions. Its tagline, "No More Forgotten." Diane became a speaker at national conferences, podcasts, and advocacy panels, not because she enjoyed the attention, but because she had learned the painful truth. Silence was the real killer. "We lost Crystal," she said at a TEDx talk later that year. But what nearly kept her lost forever was people thinking she was gone without a fight. Don't be silent. Make noise. Make memory. That's how we bring them home. As part of her mission, Diane also reached out to families of other missing persons linked to fairgrounds or traveling carnivals. She wrote dozens of letters. Some were never answered. Others turned into late-night phone calls filled with tears and shared grief. One woman, the sister of Jenny Polk, the 1992 Ohio teen, met Diane in person for the first time at the Memorial Garden. They stood in silence for nearly 10 minutes, and then they hugged. No words needed. Back in Maysville, the town council voted unanimously to dedicate the third weekend of July, the date Crystal disappeared, as Crystal Braddock Day. Schools held assemblies. Teachers taught lessons on community responsibility, the importance of speaking up, and the power of remembrance. Younger generations, who hadn't even been born when Crystal went missing, now spoke of her as if they knew her. "She was one of us," said a 12-year-old girl at a local vigil. "And we don't forget our people." One final revelation came not from police or witnesses or forensics, but from something much simpler: a letter. It was discovered in a sealed envelope inside Crystal's old sketchbook, which had been boxed away and forgotten for years. Diane opened it months after the case closed. It was addressed to no one in particular. Just a folded page, likely written just days before the fair. "This summer feels different. Not in a bad way, just like it's important, like something's about to change. I want to remember all of it. The wind on the rides, the smell of kettle corn, the way everyone's faces glow under the lights. If something ever happens, I hope people remember how alive I felt, not how I ended, but how I lived." Those words now live on the bronze plaque beside her memorial garden. The story of Crystal Braddock, her disappearance, her memory, and her voice may have taken 28 years to be heard, but when it finally was, it echoed far beyond Maysville, through courts and carnivals, through newsrooms and Reddit threads, through bracelets, torn pages, and whispers beneath the fairground lights. She wasn't just the girl who vanished, she was the girl who waited to be found. And when her words finally reached the world, they changed everything. The tilt-a-whirl is gone now. The fairgrounds where it once stood are quieter in the off-season. No more squeals of thrill-seeking kids echoing from Car 3, no more flashing lights painting streaks in the summer night. But its absence speaks just as loudly. What remains instead is a quiet garden. The earth there is different, consecrated not by ceremony, but by truth. Wildflowers grow in patches. Pink and white wind chimes hang from a wooden arch, and a path of worn bricks leads to the plaque that bears Crystal Braddock's name. Visitors often leave small tokens, feathers, charms, bracelets, sometimes even letters tucked into waterproof sleeves, sealed with hope. This place, once a stage for horror, has become something else. A shrine of memory. Diane Braddock walks that path most mornings. She says it helps her breathe, helps her understand what it means to continue living in a world that kept moving after her daughter vanished. "Some days I sit there and talk to her," she says. "I tell her what I made for dinner. I tell her who wrote in about the case. I tell her she changed people, that she mattered." Since the case closed, Diane has experienced something she hadn't in nearly 3 decades: silence that didn't feel empty. Not all wounds heal. Some, like hers, simply change shape. But that shape has now formed around something real. Not mystery, not myth, but meaning. In the months that followed the public closing of Crystal's case, the Crystal Light Foundation expanded rapidly. It now offers legal support forensic resources, and funding for families who have missing loved ones and no longer trust that the system will carry the burden alone. Diane became a fierce, if soft-spoken, advocate, speaking not as an expert, but as someone who had walked through the longest night and survived. At a 2024 conference on missing persons reform, she said, "We always talk about justice, but sometimes justice is just being remembered. Sometimes it's someone saying your name after the world has forgotten it." The foundation began organizing national memory marches, events where people walk in honor of those still missing. The first, held in Indianapolis, drew over 3,000 participants. Most wore shirts with photos, names, or handwritten notes, and on nearly every wrist, someone wore a bracelet, pink and white. Detective Marla Hicks, meanwhile, had found new purpose in the wake of the case. She wasn't just an investigator anymore. She had become something rarer, a listener. Her inbox flooded with letters from other families, other cold cases, other desperate mothers who saw their own stories in Diane's. Some wrote of missing daughters, others of lost sons. Some had waited longer than Diane. Some had just begun waiting. "I learned that we don't just investigate crimes," Hicks said in an interview. "We investigate silence, and sometimes silence is the loudest thing of all." She pushed for legislation to strengthen data sharing among state agencies, especially in relation to traveling labor forces like carnivals and fairs. With her help, Indiana passed the Braddock Act, a bill requiring background checks and centralized record-keeping for all amusement. Ride employees working in the state. The measure was nicknamed Crystal's Law by local media. Back in Maysville, life attempted to go on, as it always does. Teenagers still gather at the fair each summer. Families still eat cotton candy and win teddy bears and ride the scrambler with their arms in the air. But those who grew up with Crystal's story look at the fair differently. There's caution now. Awareness. Teachers at Maysville High use her story during lessons about safety and community responsibility. One of Crystal's Old English assignments, a poem titled "Summer is a Story," was published in the school literary magazine. Part of it reads, "The sun remembers what we forget. The air hums secrets from the trees. I don't want to be a shadow. I want to be a page you keep." And she was. Amy Coates, Crystal's childhood friend, still writes in a journal. She recently wrote an entry, 30 years after that summer, that was shared by permission. "There are days I still think I'll get a letter or a phone call, that she's alive and the past 3 decades have been some strange mistake. But then I remind myself, she is alive. In every person who wears that bracelet, in every girl who doesn't walk off alone, in every mother who speaks louder than silence. That's what she left us. Not just a mystery, a map." Amy has since become a counselor, working with trauma victims and missing persons advocacy groups. She says every time she helps a grieving family, she thinks of Crystal. But not all reflections are peaceful. Some in the community, especially those who ran the fair back in the 90s, struggle with guilt. Could more have been done? Should the tilt-a-whirl have been checked more thoroughly? Should the fair have shut down immediately? Regret clings like humidity in a July sky. One former employee, now in his 70s, anonymously shared, "I remember tightening those bolts. I remember that compartment, but I never thought it was anything more than a mechanical panel. I had no idea. And that will stay with me." But the truth is, many didn't know. And that's what makes stories like Crystal's so important, because now they do. Some final pieces of the puzzle still linger. Roy McKellen is dead, and there's no bringing him to trial, but the idea that he acted alone is now under question. Other carnivals, other rides, other reports of strange disappearances that were dismissed or poorly investigated, all have now been re-examined under a new light. The cold isn't quite gone, but it is fading. And that, perhaps, is the closest thing to justice in cases like these. In early 2025, a filmmaker approached Diane about creating a documentary on Crystal's life. Not the crime, not the aftermath, but her. The girl who drew sketches of animals in notebooks, who laughed with her friends under the stars, who believed every summer had a story to tell. Diane agreed, because if Crystal taught the world anything, it's that every life deserves to be more than a headline. It deserves to be remembered. As the final pieces of Crystal Braddock's story fell into place, the world that had forgotten her, or had never known her at all, finally listened. In a quiet, steady way, she had become a symbol of what so many others still longed for, not just justice, but acknowledgement, truth. In 2025, nearly 1 year after the case was formally closed, a permanent installation was unveiled at the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children in Washington, D.C., a sculpture titled "The Girl Who Waited." Cast in bronze, it shows a teenage girl sitting cross-legged at the edge of a ride platform, eyes gazing upward. In her hand is a single page of paper, caught mid-flutter by the wind. The base reads, "Tell my mom I didn't want to go," in memory of Crystal Braddock and every child still waiting to be found. Diane was invited to the unveiling. She placed a pink and white bracelet on the statue's wrist, tears running down her face. "She waited long enough," she said. Meanwhile, the ripples of Crystal's case continued across the country. Inspired by the Braddock Act in Indiana, 4 other states passed similar laws in 2024 and 2025, creating tighter background checks for traveling amusement workers and mandating that all state fair vendors maintain employee records for at least 30 years. These policies were supported by both law enforcement and survivor advocacy groups, rare bipartisan victories in a fractured political landscape. One congresswoman described the laws as proof that one girl's voice, even through silence, can still move mountains. But what Crystal's voice did most powerfully was change people. One of those people was Rachel Suarez, one of Crystal's friends who had remained largely silent in the decades after her disappearance. In the spring of 2025, she published a memoir titled "The Ride Never Ends." In it, she detailed her experience growing up in the shadow of a tragedy, the lifelong guilt of being that close to something terrible and not realizing it. "We thought we were safe," Rachel writes. "We thought the world couldn't change in a second. But then she walked away for 5 minutes, and everything that was became everything that wasn't." The book was dedicated to Crystal and to every girl whose goodbye was just a pause, not a farewell. Other families of the missing began to come forward, emboldened by Crystal's legacy. Some reopened old cases. Others found new support through the Crystal Light Foundation, which by mid-2025 had funded over 30 private investigations and connected nearly 200 families with legal and psychological resources. In Texas, the family of 14-year-old Alina Reese, missing since 1991, credited the Braddock story for bringing renewed attention to their daughter's case. A new lead, uncovered in July 2025, was being actively investigated. The cold cases were thawing, and Crystal was leading the way. Even beyond advocacy and legislation, Crystal's memory found ways to live and breathe in unexpected places. In Maysville, a mural now stretches across the side of the old county museum. It shows Crystal smiling under carnival lights, her face painted in vibrant color, bracelet on her wrist. Behind her is the shadow of a ride, drawn not ominously, but softly, almost like a memory fading into mist. Teenagers skate by it on their way to the fair. Elderly women stop and pray in front of it. Someone, no one knows who, replaces the bouquet at its base every week. For Diane, the greatest comfort hasn't come from the awards, the press, or even the reforms. It has come from the quiet things, The random letters, the late-night messages from strangers, the children who now know Crystal's name. One child, a 10-year-old girl from Ohio, sent Diane a card with a drawing of a friendship bracelet and the words, "If I ever get lost, I hope someone listens like you did." Diane keeps that one in her wallet. Of course, not every answer brings peace. Some questions remain unanswered. Where is the rest of Crystal's journal? Did Roy McKellen act alone? Was Crystal the only victim? Why did it take so long? And how many more secrets lie hidden under the lights and music of summer fairs, waiting for someone to notice that something, or someone, is missing? But maybe the point isn't that we get all the answers. Maybe the point is that we stop pretending the questions don't matter. Crystal's story in the end is not about tragedy. It's about resilience, endurance, and above all, voice. A voice that wasn't loud, a voice that didn't scream, but one that left a message scribbled in panic, in ink that faded with time, but not with truth. A voice that said, "Please tell my mom I didn't want to go." And because the world finally listened, that voice will never be forgotten. So now we return to where it all began. A warm July evening in 1994, the scent of kettle corn on the breeze, the sound of laughter weaving through the rusted bars of a tilt-a-whirl. A teenage girl with a pink and white bracelet, her summer stretched out before her like a promise. Crystal Braddock was not a headline, not a cold case file, not a cautionary tale. She was real, she was vivid, she was loved, and for 28 long years she was hidden beneath the noise, until a broken ride, a torn page, and a mother's unwavering hope brought her back into the light. Let her story remind us of the quiet moments that matter, the things left unsaid, the dangers ignored, the voices we too often dismiss. Let her story be a mirror, because behind every missing person poster, every blurred photo on a corkboard, is a world of love and memory that deserves to be heard. And let her final words echo in us, not as a whisper of tragedy, but as a call to action. Please tell my mom I didn't want to go. What would you have done if you'd been at the fair that night? Would you have seen her? Heard her? Asked why she was alone? Or would you, like so many of us, have looked away? If Crystal's story moved you, don't let it end here. Share her name. Talk about the missing. Support the families still waiting. Because somewhere, someone else is scribbling a note, folding it tight, and hoping the world will care enough to read it. And maybe, just maybe, your voice could be the one that brings them home. Thank you for watching. We'd love to hear your thoughts, your memories, your stories. Leave a comment below. And if you know of a case that deserves to be told, reach out. Because silence doesn't solve mysteries, people do. Don't forget to subscribe for more true stories. And remember, the truth is always waiting, if we're brave enough to look for it.